From the Sky News Centre, this is Paul Murray Live.
Thank you very much for watching. What an exclusive show he just had. The boss of ASIS, the boss of ASIO, booted out of National Security Committee meetings. They'll only be invited. They won't be there permanently. Is Paul Keaty really running the show? We'll all find out in the next few days. Well done to Sherry for her excellent reporting. Find her and everyone else's exclusives, highlights and everything else at skynews.com.au. Now, we all know that when it comes to the Prime Minister, you can trust everything he says all the time, right?
My word is my bond.
And certainly you can trust the Treasurer of Australia because, well, he's better than the rest of us. He's the one who did nothing when it came to cost of living last year. In fact, he took $1,500 off 10 million Australians. But it's okay. He's handing back $15 a week of your own money via tax changes. Now, we all remember that up Hill and down Dale, he told us that no, there'll be no changes to taxation policy.
We won't oppose the full package if it comes to the Senate unamended, because our highest priority is to make sure that Australians do receive that tax cut next week.
And it went on and on and on for years and years. And then, of course, despite the fact that they told us all the way through summer there was going to be no changes, of course, there were changes just around Australia Day.
Well, we have changed our view, and we've changed our view because we found a better way to provide more cost of living relief to more people in a way that doesn't add to inflation.
Well, there was a mega story that broke over the weekend that should have got way more attention today, and it's from my colleague and friend Andrew Clennell, and it's all to do with negative gearing. Now, of course, there are many Australians who see their only way of being able to create wealth for themselves, wealth for their retirement, and yes, wealth for their children, is to be able to own a home or be paying off a home and then get a loan to pay off another house, an investment property. Negative gearing. Literally, hundreds of thousands of people do this, and it is the only way that they can take the giant step up on the wealth ladder. But we're not talking about people who become instant millionaires. They're just people who are able to provide a rental property to somebody, and we know how much that's important at the moment, as well as, yes, at the end of the day when they play Kaplunk, a few $100,000 to be able to pay for the back nine of your life. Well, Grim Jim is saying exactly what he said about tax changes that were never ever going to happen about negative gearing.
We're not contemplating or considering resurrecting the policies that we took to the 2019 election.
But the exclusive that Andrew Clennell was able to get out of the government when he put in a Freedom of Information request, well, it has shown that the government is well and truly doing its homework via the department that the Treasurer is in charge of, that being the Treasury Department. They don't have hundreds, but they have 1,000 different documents about the potential changes this government might be looking into when it comes to negative gearing.
Sky News can reveal the Treasury Department has more than 1,000 documents in its possession, which it classes as advice from it to the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, about changing the negative gearing and capital gains tax arrangements around investment properties.
Now, for his part, Chalmers' officers have said, no change, nothing going to happen. Of course, Jim Chalmers didn't say it. It was his office. There were no questions about it today in Parliament. I don't know why. There should be front and centre questions about this tomorrow in Parliament and some yes-no answers. You see, government is always allowed to look at lots of different options, but we know that when you start to look at options, it becomes politically weaponised. Back when the Turnbull government was looking about whether or not some of the back office staff who work in and around the health system might be able to be consolidated, it was referred to as privatising Medicare. The justification was because the bureaucrats had done some work about whether this was potentially a way to save money. It, of course, wasn't the privatisation of Medicare, but the opposition was allowed to say, well, it's clearly what they want to do, because if they didn't want to do it, why would they ask anyone to go and do the paperwork? Well, there's 1,000 documents that are telling us this government is doing the paperwork on changes to negative gearing. Now, remember, Jim Chalmers, who tells us with the same clarity that he did that there'll be no changes to tax policy as he took to the last election, all the way through the first couple of years of this government, only to change the tax policy, of course, went to the last election saying no changes to negative gearing, now tells everyone no changes to negative gearing. But which one do you think is actually the real Jim Chalmers? The one who's saying there's no changes to negative gearing, or the one who's allowed his bureaucrats to come up with 1,000 documents into the changes of negative gearing. And remember what he said in 2019 when changes to negative gearing was the policy of the Labor Party. I think this is the inner voice of the Treasurer that he is desperately finding a way to let out of the bag.
Any housing policy that doesn't deal with negative gearing and capital gains tax is a sham. Housing affordability, which doesn't make important and considered changes to capital gains and negative gearing, has a hole in the middle of it. If you want to deal with housing affordability, you need to start with negative gearing and capital gains.
Well, the real Grim Jim, please stand up. But I think you've just seen what the real Grim Jim is, the one who really would like to make the change. Watch this space, 1,000 documents, some questions in Parliament, please, because I'd love to see his answers. Well done to Andrew Clennell. Again, Sherry Markson as well, the team breaking big news. That's why you've always got to be watching us all day, every day, all night, and check out skynews.com.au. Now, let's talk about the smug politics of the Greens. Now, one of their newest MPs who came in a bit of a green slide, which meant many seats in southeast Queensland, went from blue, not to red, but blue straight out to green. And as I've said many times, this generation of Greens seem to want to do with renting what they did previously with the environment. Make it seem like that's their major policy, but the reality is it's all of the red stuff in the middle of the watermelon. Well, here was a question that was asked today by the housing spokesperson of the Greens trying to get under the Prime Minister's skin because he has rental properties.
Question to the Prime Minister. Why is Labor refusing to phase out the big tax handouts for property investors, including the capital gains tax discount and negative gearing that benefit wealthy property investors like yourself and the 75% of Labor politicians who own an investment property?
Now, it's fine for him to make the point that it is the Greens' position that they want to change negative gearing, they want to change capital gains tax. But what is misleading, deeply misleading, about the way that the question is asked is that it's as if there are no property investors in his own party, that there aren't any people literally sitting next to him in the Parliament. Instead, it's all evil landlords like the Prime Minister or many people on the government or opposition benches. But yet again, let's point out the reality that negative gearing is used by all sides of politics because, as I say, it is used by all types of people to create greater wealth for themselves and potentially intergenerational wealth for their families. Put simply, the few $100,000 that comes once you end up selling the property might end up being $100,000 you might be able to hand to your kids, so God forbid they could get anywhere near a deposit, let alone being able to buy a property. But can we play the question again? Because, again, it makes it seem like the Greens have no issue on this whatsoever. For want of a better term, no dirty hands. It's only those evil buggers in the major parties.
Question to the Prime Minister. Why is Labor refusing to phase out the big tax handouts for property investors, including the capital gains tax discount and negative gearing that benefit wealthy property investors like yourself and the 75% of Labor politicians who own an investment property?
All right, well, let's do it. These are the Greens MPs that have investment properties and are just part of the cadre that their own housing spokesperson is trying to throw under the bus. In the lower house, Elizabeth Watson-Brown is the member for Ryan. On the Parliament House website, you can go to the declarations of MPs about whether they've got shares, property holdings, and guess what? She's got property holdings. In terms of herself, she owns her residential house, an investment property and a flat. Her spouse owns 50% of the house they live in, plus the investment property and the holiday flat, as well as dependent children who end up owning a property in South Australia. Nick McKim is a senator from Tasmania. He has a residential property, he has a shack, and he has not one but two investment properties. These are the receipts that are freely available. But the Greens want to pretend that they are not working both sides of the aisle here. Penny Alleman Payne. Does everyone have a hyphen in their name in this party? She, of course, has a residential property in Queensland. Then she has an investment property as well. Oh, and then there's our old mate, Maureen Faruqi. I know bringing up her name means that I'm somehow doing some sort of dog whistle on race, just in case the Broadcasting Authority is planning to investigate the matter following her complaint. I'm not. I'm just pointing out the obvious hypocrisy of the political tactics of the Greens. Well, Maureen Faruqi, she has her place of residence, which is in New South Wales. She has an investment property in New South Wales. She has another investment property in New South Wales, and she's got a bit of land in Pakistan. Now, of course, the reason the Greens want to do this is because the Greens see great political advantage, regardless of whether it's right or wrong, political advantage in trying to turn as many renters in Australia into Greens voters. They would look the other way on everything from anti-Semitism to their tax policy, their defence policy, and all of the other madness that comes with the party. Now, of course, this is a well-timed attack because the rental queues couldn't be longer in metropolitan areas, particularly metropolitan Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, as well as regional areas. Places like Ipswich, where, as we've told you before, about 150 people are applying for just one vacant place. And there's political opportunity here because, as we've shown you before, 2021, the census, 30.6% of people are currently renting a home in Australia. Now, the major parties, and I've warned them about this, the major parties always look at the third column, the renting column, as just people who desperately like to buy a house one day. Now, that might be the case in 5 or 10 years' time, but it's not the case for the vast majority of people that are renting right now. They're just trying to keep a roof over their head. So if Labor and Liberal are only talking to renters as potential buyers, there is an opportunity in the market here for the Greens to push into an area where people are going to be renting and renting for some time. And why do I say that this is a political tactic of the Greens to increase their representation in the parliament? Because think about that number, 30.6% of the country are renters. But according to the 4 biggest opinion polls, the Greens' primary vote is now somewhere between 11 and 12.5%. If they can lift that to 15, 16, 17%, i.e. exclusively bouncing their vote due to renters who believe the other two parties are somehow leaving them behind, then there could be major electoral consequences. Electoral consequences where the Greens often run second to Labor, which means they're able to leapfrog Labor, take Labor preferences and then take Labor seats. And if the surge that took place, and they didn't win an awful lot, but the vote changed in many places around central Brisbane and other parts of local government areas, not to mention, of course, what's happened in Ipswich West and Inala, as many as 6 seats could end up flipping to the Greens from Labor at the upcoming state election, a point made by the Greens candidate for mayor, who thankfully was not elected, but listen to the point that he shows about where their growth in the vote was.
We saw the biggest swings to us in the parts of the city where renters are really struggling the most, where we've seen big increases in rent. So obviously people liked our ideas. They really liked the idea of freezing rent increases for 2 years.
So 2 things here. We don't know how big a winner this is going to be for the Greens, but there are the early green shoots, forgive the pun and the jacket, that this could be a bit of a winner for the Greens. This could be a place where disaffected Labor voters, particularly in the Queensland election, may end up going to the Greens. But there are also cashed up former Liberals who now are starting to vote Green as well. Many of the people who moved to southeast Queensland from places like lockdown Melbourne or too busy Sydney, again, they take their politics with them to southeast Queensland, and it's changing. It's changing where the hard left is starting to move forward. So yes, that's their politics. The way they argue their politics is, of course, hypocritical because their own MPs are the ones that are the advantage, that have taken advantage of the very schemes that they are wishing to cut off, but also pretending that only everyone but the Greens MPs are actually taken care of. But there is a very significant warning shot that both major parties need to wake up to, which is that if you vacate the field completely from any sort of policy to help somebody who is a renter to continue renting, then if there are no options on the table, why wouldn't you consider voting for the party that has a solution, let alone the right solution for you? We need to have a scenario where both major parties start to seriously look at policies that mean that people that are currently renting will be able to claim back some of the things that they spend while living in a rental property, say on their tax. Remember the business asset write-off scheme where small businesses would be able to turn around and do things like if they were buying a printer or a cooker if it's their business, or maybe even a new car for their business. They could turn around and they could write the value off up to $120,000 per item off their tax. Well, where is the major party saying that if you want to put a mobile air conditioner into your rental property, you'd be able to claim it up against your tax? Where's the major party person saying the same about a woman who is fleeing a domestic violence situation, who needs to find the money to be able to pay for a couch, a TV, a fridge and a bed? These are the types of things that need to be discussed. Otherwise, if the only people talking to renters who will most likely be continuing to rent for the next 3 to 5 years, the only ones that have something on the table are the Greens. And the Greens, of course, have the stupid policies of saying that they can control your rent and set the market, when, of course, that's not the way that things work. But my appeal to both sides of major party politics, the Greens will continue to surge with 30% of Australians if you don't seem to be doing anything for them. Advice is what you pay for it, and my advice is free, but just do for renters what you've been able to do for some people in small business. Obviously, you put all the different tags and titles on it to make sure that it's not above a certain amount of money and rich kids end up doing it. We're talking about normal people that are struggling to keep a roof over their head. You know, I like to talk about other people's money. That's their attitude when it comes to spending what you have to work till, lunchtime Wednesday on, as you work all day Monday, Tuesday, into Wednesday, paying off the tax for these people to take care of themselves. And we know that other people's money, a story we brought you a couple of weeks ago was that the person who's trying to make you pay more for aged care, Annika Wells, she's also got a job as the sports minister, which is why in 2022 she decided to pop up at the Melbourne Cup. But as I'll explain in a moment or two's time, she wasn't turning up as the sports minister, she just was enjoying a freebie. The Guardian told us that there were 4 politicians who went to Melbourne in and around the 2022 Melbourne Cup. And of course, they claimed their travel from where they live to Melbourne and back, as well as the Comcars and other things that took them to and from the racecourses. Annika Wells, the aged care minister, again, is the sports minister. And as you can see here, here's the receipts about how she flew to Melbourne, she flew from Melbourne to Brisbane, and she was driven around in Melbourne. A spokesperson for Ms Wells says that she appeared at the racing event as the sports minister, but the reason for travelling to Melbourne was for an address for the Melbourne Institute the next day. Well, of course, she could have flown down the same day as the announcement, but instead she flew down in order to go to the Melbourne Cup. And thank goodness for Dr Google, because despite the fact in 2022 the fresh government was trying to say, well, cost of living's a problem, don't go sipping champagne in the various birdcage tents. In fact, this was the warning that was placed up towards the Prime Minister, or from the Prime Minister, that appeared in the columns of The Age of the Sydney Morning Herald. But guess who defied the Prime Minister? The Trade Minister, a Labor MP, and the Sports Minister / the lady who wants to make you pay more for aged care, the Aged Care Minister, Annika Wells. That's the cartoon. Now, also we learned, by the way, that she was there as a guest of the Furphy Brewing Company. So all this nonsense, I was there as the sports minister. If she was a guest of Victoria Racing, VRC, whatever it's called, you'd understand. But when she's just really there to bang around in the birdcage with a Furphy in her hand and make sure that she takes some photos because one day she might be, the inside run. Don't know my horse racing that well. Get the inside run on being one day a bigger, better minister and eventually the leader, opposition leader or prime minister. Watch this space. Somebody who's more than willing for you to pay for her to look amazing, despite the fact that she was there for a speech that she could have flown in on the day for and flown out for, but she didn't. But the Turnbull Times again has shown us that there are a bunch of MPs with a bit of a sweet tooth when it comes to just magically turning up in and around sporting events that we help fly them to, put them up in accommodation or drive them to and from. And a couple may be quite interesting here because they're from the oh-so-pure Greens. Dorinda Cox is a West Australian Greens senator who spent more than $6,000 on a 2-day trip to Melbourne and Canberra in October 2022. She attended the AFL semi-final game between Collingwood and Fremantle. Now, being a West Australian senator, I presume she had no interest at all in watching a West Australian team in a semi-final of the AFL, thanks to the taxpayer getting her here. But a spokesperson for Cox explained that the Senate had been invited by the AFL's diversity and inclusion team to discuss racism in sports in relation to events at Collingwood at the time. Do you think that could have happened in, say, the boardroom or at a meeting, a coffee shop, over the phone? No. It had to happen in the stands while Fremantle was playing in the semi-finals in 2022. And again, Marine Faruqi. Again, this is not about dog whistling racism. We're just calling you out for the double standards of the way things work. But I know that'll be her complaint in the Senate, the Media Relations Committee, or when she's inevitably filing a handwritten complaint to someone to investigate me, this channel, parent company, all the rest of it. New South Wales Green Senator Marine Faruqi also visited Melbourne in November 2022 and attended the final of the International Cricket Council's Men's T20 World Cup. The one-night trip cost about $2,000, including accommodation, flight and transport between venues. A spokesperson for Faruqi said that the New South Wales Senator did attend the T20 in a personal capacity, but she insisted she claimed no expenses related to this. No, she just magically turned up for free in Melbourne. The spokesperson said her official duties in Melbourne included speaking at the Islamic Council of Victoria dinner. OK, fly in the day of the dinner. Why are you going to the cricket? A meeting with union members. What, can't be done over the phone? Can't happen in a boardroom? Could only happen at the MCG? And door knocking for the state election. So hang on, we're paying for them to fly around to door knock in an election that's not even in her home state? That's why we call it other people's money. Now, we know that Adam Giles is a ridiculous minister. He should have gone by now after his multiple failings when it comes to the immigration portfolio, and the questions were coming thick and fast for him today in Parliament, and the answers were so ridiculous I'm not even going to play them for you. But here was the incoming.
Last week, the minister claimed charges against hardcore criminals released from detention were being dropped due to a technical issue, quote, first identified late on Sunday, 10 March. Can the minister confirm that the legal issue was resolved by regulation on 8 December last year and that the minister's subsequent failure to reissue valid visas for more than 3 months has led directly to dangerous criminals being released from prison? The Solicitor General Stephen Donoghue told the High Court on 8 November 2023 that up to 340 people in long-term detention could be released as a result of the NZYQ case. Is that the number of criminals that the government expects to release as referred to in its secret briefing to journalists on Friday? Secret briefing. Over the next 6 months, how many foreign criminals will finish a custodial sentence and be released into the community instead of going to immigration detention?
We're also being softened up for even more people to be let out of detention because the government apparently is not in charge of the system anymore. As clueless Claire O'Neill said, it's now the courts that are making the decisions here. Well, of course, the government could pass a rule, couldn't they? And if you needed to go to a referendum on something, I'm pretty sure I know what the 60-40 result would be, and it wouldn't be the one that they got when they took the wrong question to Australia last year. For her say, Jackie Lambie, who of course is going off like a two-bob watch at the moment because she's desperately trying to get her people into the balance of power in Tasmania. It'll probably happen. Well, like a broken clock, it can be right twice a day, and she is about Andrew Giles.
Maybe Minister Giles' time is all but over as a minister, and he should be back on the backbench. To lose control of our national security is an absolute disgrace, and if you can't get rid of a person who's lost control of that, then we're in trouble in this country.
Today was an impossibly difficult day for the Fitzgibbon family in Cessnock, not that far from Newcastle in the Hunter Valley. Of course, you know that Joel Fitzgibbon is a man who served his country well, served his party proudly, and has been a friend of this show and always been very open about his views about how the country should be running. But today was the day where he, his wife and his other children had to bury their brother and son. Just 33 was Jack. And of course he died in an accident as part of the learning to parachute. You can't imagine how difficult this was, but literally hundreds and hundreds, probably thousands of people ended up lining the streets of Cessnock to be outside the church, to walk behind the casket and to pay tribute to this young man's life. When anyone loses somebody who they love, it is hard to find the words to put into a eulogy. The family found it hard to speak, so many of them committed something to a pre-recorded message, and even then you could hear the emotion in their voice, and why wouldn't they? His sister Grace, one of those who spoke.
I know in my bones that you will always be with me, walk beside me, watch me.
And of course, Joel, a man who had been a Minister of the Crown, a Defence Minister, an MP, an advocate for the industries that he loves, is a strong public speaker. But a father having to speak upon the death of his son would break you in half and do so forever.
March 6 was the worst day of my life. We are so very proud of him.
You can see in the photos how proud he was of his son, how proud he is of his family. From everyone who's had the opportunity to know Joel Fitzgibbon, to meet Joel Fitzgibbon, and for you to be able to hear Joel Fitzgibbon, I want to send him and his family strength and love. Now, anyone who has lost a child before they leave the world, it's just not the way it should go. And it doesn't matter if it's the smallest of children, the biggest of boys and girls, or whether it is your adult child. It breaks you and it breaks you forever. There will always be a hole in his and his family's heart the size of their son. There will always be people around them that will try to hold them up and push them together, and they will find a way to put one foot in front of the other. It will be slowly at first, and then eventually they will return to a normal pace, but they will always have something without them. But I just wanted to say tonight, of course, to the Fitzgibbon family again, nothing but strength and love for that journey. But to everyone else who's watching us right now, who didn't have the TV cameras turn up at the funeral for your son or daughter, to see your pain that was just as equal as that of this incredible family. To those who still have a hole in their heart the size of the person who they miss and they will miss for the rest of their lives, I say strength and love to you. It's a club nobody wants to be in, but it's a one that will provide strength to each other. Back with more in a second. We'll get into the debate this evening, but again, strength and love to everyone who needs it. If you're watching us in hospital, if you just lost someone yesterday, or maybe it was 25 years ago, we're sorry. Talk in a second. Oh my, is not the media a little fired up about a speech that Donald Trump made on the weekend?
This was not some meandering off-message comment. Trump's allusions to political violence are not merely rhetorical. His supporters take them literally. That's part of the big problem here.
When the former president, who's already incited violence among his followers, says that there's going to be a bloodbath, he is telling us what he is going to do.
What I heard was a continuation of the same rhetoric, the same endorsement of political violence that we've seen from Donald Trump for years.
The problem is that's not what he said. In fact, if you have a listen to everything he said before and everything he said after bloodbath, he's talking about cars.
China now is building a couple of massive plants where they're going to build the cars in Mexico and they think that they're going to sell those cars into the United States with no tax at the border. Let me tell you something to China. If you're listening, President Xi, and you and I are friends, but he understands the way I deal, those big monster car manufacturing plants that you're building in Mexico right now, and you think you're going to get that, you're going to not hire Americans, and you're going to sell the cars to us. No, we're going to put a 100% tariff on every single car that comes across the line, and you're not going to be able to sell those cars. If I get elected, now, if I don't get elected, it's going to be a bloodbath for the whole. That's going to be the least of it. It's going to be a bloodbath for the country. That'll be the least of it.
Let's discuss this and a whole lot more with Nicholas Rees, the Deputy Lord Mayor of Melbourne, and the man who, would prefer to be in Yeppoon, but alas, he is where he is, which is Canberra, because it's kind of the job he applied for. Senator Matt Canavan. Now, Nick, today around the water cooler of the university or the city council, bloodbath, bloodbath, bloodbath. Is that the first time that you actually heard the context of why he said what he said?
Look, Paul, I'm such an American political tragic that I may have already seen the footage. And look, I do tend to agree with you in some respects. I do agree that often there are liberal elements of the American media who do tend to overreact to some of the things that Donald Trump says. That doesn't mean I don't think that a Donald Trump presidency would be an absolute disaster for America and the world, because it most certainly would be. But I also can see that, yes, sometimes the liberal press does overreact on these things.
Good. Now, look, don't get me wrong. There's plenty out there if you want to go and find it about weird things that have been said, and I think sort of the minute silence for the people in jail is okay. Anyway, a lot of kook between now and November they're going to work through. But, Matt, I did love watching everyone. And, look, I played it last night as an example of what had happened on the weekend, but I didn't quite realise what the reaction was. But it is amazing that literally you could just take 3 words out of the middle of a sentence that has nothing to do with what they all go off and repeat that it is something to do with. He very obviously is talking about economic consequences, but it's a bit of an example about how in the next 8 months, when there's no more primaries, that every single word is going to matter, because how it gets cut up and spun around is how he goes from the bloke leading in the polls to a lot tighter than I think many people think it's going to be.
Well, being from Queensland, Paul, and you're right, I'd much prefer to be up there. We're pretty familiar with bloodbaths. It was a big one on the weekend for the Labor Party out in Ipswich West and Inala. It was a complete and total bloodbath out there with a 20% swing or so away from the Labor Party. But look, I actually think this probably does Trump more benefits than not, because it just completely destroys the credibility of his opponents in the media. And now, thanks to social media and 24/7 news media, people see that. They see that the likes of Jen Psaki are effectively lying about what he said. And then when they go to criticise him about something else, maybe a legitimate criticism of something else he says, their critiques will be lessened because they don't have credibility anymore. And it's why most people are just losing faith in the mainstream media. And God forbid we ever have some kind of government regulators imposing a misinformation or fact-checking type approach, because there's just so many lies in the mainstream media that no one should be allowed to police this stuff. I think people can understand it for themselves.
No, I know it's a horribly gendered term, but the boy who cried wolf comes to mind here about some of the things that they want to turn. If you want to update that into woke circles, you can say that they cried wolf. Nicholas?
Well, hang on, Paul. I mean, you can't, criticise the sort of liberal media for going over the top with their coverage of Donald Trump and not admit that you yourself, Paul, sometimes go over the top when it comes to covering Joe Biden. I mean, I sit here week after week while you play that sort of scary music.
That's not the issue, though.
Have Joe Biden, who by his own admission suffers from a speech impediment, and you quite cruelly tease him about that and don't acknowledge that he's had a lifelong speech impediment. But he's done he's managed perfectly well and been very successful with. So, I mean, you've got to call bias out on all sides, including your own, Paul Murray.
Nicholas, to go whacking me like that. You've walked up in the prison yard and you've whacked the bloke you think's the bully. Well, guess what's going to happen for the next 25 minutes? Your mic's going to be a little bit lower, and Matt can say whatever the hell he wants.
Ringing the bell, just ringing the bell on you there, mate.
Well, I'm being polite in my response, not ringing it back at you. Now, let's get to this. All right. About negative gearing. Now, of course, the government has no plans whatsoever when it comes to the changing of negative gearing. It's just a Freedom of Information request from Andrew Clennell that produced potentially 1,000 hits on what the Treasury is doing when it comes to potential working up of changes on negative gearing. Now, again, the Treasurer will say, well, of course, we're just doing our homework. It doesn't matter here. But last time I checked, the homework on some efficiencies in the very, very back end of the Department of Health and Human Services was the entire impetus of the privatised Medicare nonsense of 2016, okay? So, Nicholas, you're going to be caught in a bind here, because either you're planning to change negative gearing or the scare campaign in 2016 was a bag of BS, which we know it was. But, Matt, we know, and if our team can go and find that grab from 2019 again, the bloke speaking with conviction in terms of Jim Chalmers and negative gearing is the one in 2019 who wanted to take it away, not the BS merchant who's turning around and saying, oh, no plans whatsoever, apart from 1,000 documents.
Well, speaking of the boy who cried wolf, Paul, the Labor Party just can't be trusted on tax now. They can't be trusted because they lied about their plans for tax changes all over summer. Well, they did. They told us they weren't even planning to make these changes, Nick, and clearly they were. Clearly they were working in beavering in the background over Christmas to change the stage 3 tax cuts. They totally lied about that. They obviously promised before the last election to implement those tax cuts, walked away from that. So now you have a situation where they're now telling us that they won't introduce negative gearing either now or after the next election. Well, their form on their record, they simply cannot be trusted. And clearly they've got all the work there available for them. They're ready to push the button. As soon as Jim gets the green light from Anthony Albanese, you'll be losing your negative gearing, you'll be paying more tax. And that's always what will happen under a Labor government, as we've seen in the last few months.
Nicholas, it is a classic process attack that every and any opposition can do, which is to say, OK, ministries are sort of presented 3 options, right? The really easy option that won't have much effect, the sandwich that stinks a little bit, or the one in the middle. And, like the Goldilocks of politics, we always end up with the one in the middle. But because they had 2 other options on the table, you get to say, look at what the option on the table is. So put simply, if a Freedom of Information request from Andrew Clennell is producing 1,000 hits on potential documentation in and around negative gearing, what does the government have to do to put it back in the horse? Because it feels like there's 1,000 bits of it on the road.
Well, Paul, I mean, long-time viewers of this program will know that, you and I both acknowledge that there is a problem with negative gearing arrangements in this country. I mean, you've many times said that you think there shouldn't be negative gearing, tax breaks on 4th, 5th, 6th homes. Now, I probably would bring it in a little bit earlier than that, but, we basically agree with the principle that there's a problem there. And guess what? I have no doubt that the fearlessly independent Treasury of the Commonwealth of Australia also thinks there's a problem with negative gearing, because blind Freddie can tell you that there is. And so being an independent body, it doesn't surprise me that they're regularly putting advice up to the Treasurer to say, hey, mate, there's a problem here, okay? Now, the Treasurer's office have come out very clearly and categorically today, said that they have no plans for any negative gearing changes.
Tax changes. This is the problem.
I mean, I think they've used their
form is that they go to an election saying that one system's going to be put in place. They spend 18 months pretending that system's going to be kept in place, and then at 5 minutes to midnight before a by-election, they change it. Now, we can argue whether it's the right or the wrong change, but that's the trust hurdle that you've got to get over here, Nicholas.
Well, look, I suspect the realpolitik here is that the Albanese government burned a lot of their political capital around making some much-needed changes to the Stage 3 tax cuts. And so you're not going to see, my prediction would be that you're not going to see any changes in this area this side of an election because, they just don't have the capital there. But as you and I both agree, Paul, it's something that should happen. You and I both agree on this, Paul. It's something that should happen. And you and I, we're not going to be fooled. We're not going to be fooled by
tax under the government I led until the minority turned around and made him do it after the election. I told you, Nicholas, if you're going to slap, the big boy, he's going to come back at you. And I'm liking this. There's pepper in your step, but I'm sorry, Matt has more interesting things to say.
Well, no, but you and I, Paul, we are not going to be fooled by Matt Canavan's cheap beat-up and all this. Like, you can pull out as big a beat-up stick as you want, Matt, but Paul and I aren't going to fall for it. We support reform in this area. We support reform in this area.
Like, it's clear... Nick, it's clear that yourself and Jim Chalmers, if they were given they were dictator for a day, they'd want to get rid of these negative gearing arrangements. But it's very clear that a coalition government and coalition members of Parliament
like Paul Murray and I,
we don't want people paying more taxes. Paul's got a different view. I don't know his views. If he's got a different view than me, I don't support that view. I think people should be able to deduct legitimate expenses for making investments in this country to make themselves more wealthy. You can do it for shares. You can do it for shares. You can negatively gear shares. There's no restrictions on it. There's never a discussion about that. Why don't we allow rich people to negatively gear shares, to margin loans and do the shares, but they can't? We want to stop the plumbers and the teachers and the nurses from doing it on their real estate investments. It's ridiculous. You should be allowed to do that in this country. I don't want the tax man to take more of your money. And if you don't like paying taxes, you shouldn't vote for Labor Party. It's as simple as that.
Yeah. Nicholas?
Well, again, you want history wars on this, Matt? I'll give you history wars. You know that negative gearing was originally set up to encourage people to invest in businesses, job-creating businesses. And then somewhere along the way, someone said, let's extend negative gearing arrangements to houses. And guess what? Then houses turned into an investment class in this country. And we ended up with massive speculation around property, and it overall hasn't been good for the country.
All right.
So negative gearing for businesses, job-creating investments, good. Houses,
providing
not
a house
so much.
is a business.
I tell you what, there's something's in the air. There's something going on here, and I'm looking forward to this. Wherever's happening here, I know when Stephen Conroy's just here to help what's really going on. Let's find out what's really going on with Nick in the next couple of weeks. All right, let's talk about something a bit. There's nothing dodgy. He's just fired up. Let's talk about something that was dodgy, and that is the way that the union movement played in Ipswich West on the weekend. And to me, it's a sign, while it's great that there was a bloody nose, it's great that the grin is off Miles's face, and I hope that it's the start of something where it goes later. But as I said with Chris Kenny, this is the windsock. This is not the plane taking off from the airport yet. Got to wait towards the end of the year. But there were only 4 candidates that were running in Ipswich West, and in the state of Queensland, they've introduced now preferential voting because this government knows its primary vote's falling, so it needs Greens' preferences to get over the line. Now, in that seat, I want to show you the how to vote card of the Cannabis Party. Now, the official how to vote of the Cannabis Party was 1, and you fill in the rest. But the union movement, who were standing right next to the people handing out for the Cannabis Party, was handing this out, making it look like it was from the Cannabis Party as well. And it, funnily enough, told you that when you were throwing around your preferences, guess where you should put your first preference or second vote, that being the Labor Party. Now, in the Queensland election, as I've spoken at great nauseam and great detail, the reality of their system is that party candidates, parties and candidates are capped on what they can spend per seat. Independent organisations like unions, and I've got a list of all the different unions, well, they can all individually spend the same amount, if not a little more, than the candidate. So you could end up running like 26-1 against anyone who isn't the Labor Party. Throw on top of that misleading stuff like what happened in the booths here. And Matt, look, I hope the bell is ringing. I hope these people get flushed. They're terrible government, but they're great at politics. What did that little tactic tell you about on the weekend? And it's easy to find in a by-election. It's hard to find in a statewide election.
Look, I'm not going to get too worked up about it, Paul. It's politics. All's fair almost in love and war. This sort of stuff happens on all sides. And look, it didn't actually work that well because when I checked on Saturday night, things might have moved or shifted. But when I checked, the preferences from the legalised cannabis movement were actually flowing to Labor at a rate less than what the One Nation preferences were flowing to the coalition. So it didn't really have the desired effect for them. They probably would have been better off handing out Labor preferences. So Labor had a vote card, sorry. So look, mate, I'm not going to get too worked up about it. Good luck to them. But some of these things, I think, you can spend your life whinging and whining about it, or you can get better at your own tactics and fight fire with fire.
I was going to say, I can fully decode what you just said there, and it was a good idea. I might do it when in our one. Now, give us an idea here.
Maybe not with the cannabis leaves. Maybe not with those.
Yeah, maybe not those. It's like, oh, how to save coal jobs, vote 2, vote all the rest of it. But Nick, it is always fascinating, and again, as a student of the game, practitioner of the game, watching how the team who thinks they've got no chance tries to invent a chance is fascinating to watch. And again, that Queensland Labor machine, terrible at government, great at winning elections. We'll find out what their wedge is, and we won't even start on stadiums tonight, what their wedge is between now and October, November. But they seem cooked.
Yeah, I mean, look, Queensland has a history of swinging big, doesn't it? I mean, we all remember when Campbell Newman won the biggest electoral victory in Australian political history, only to find a few years later he had the biggest electoral defeat in Australian political history when Anastasia Palaszczuk was swept to power and the LNP was, reduced to, I think it was minor party status in the Queensland Parliament. So, look, they were massive swings on the weekend. As you, I think, rightly said, I think it's too early to say, oh, well, the government's gone. We'll have to wait till closer to October to get a sense of whether the clear anger that was out there and they wanted to give the government a whack is going to follow through to October. It's, of course, a different question that people, a different dynamic that exists in a statewide election compared to a by-election. By-election, you give the government a whack, send them a message, but you're not necessarily changing the government. At a proper general election, you are. So it's a different proposition. But gee whiz, if you're the Miles government, you'd need to be looking very long and hard at that result and thinking about what you've got to do between now and October if you're going to hang on. And they've got to give up this idea of winning seats. They're going to be sandbagging seats. I mean, they've still got an 18-seat majority, I think it is. Might be a seat or two out there, but they've still got a very big majority. So there's still plenty of ways that the Miles government can hold on in October.
Yeah, early suggestion is at least 6 of those could end up going to the Greens, who would obviously prop them up. Interesting about what happened on the Sunshine Coast with the local council elections, where their mayor kind of went a little bit tealy. So obviously those were former strong LNP places, but whether they're up for somebody else's taking, we'll all wait and see. And I still say, Townsville, unbelievable, right? That a One Nation back bloke looks like he's going to end up being the mayor at this stage. But I've got to say, Matt, can you just lend me part of one of your doctorates, please? Because I have no idea how that Queensland electoral website works. Like, honestly, I've tried to double check and find and follow the vote. I need many letters after my name for it to work. Can they update from the GeoCities site from a long time ago? Anyway, quick break.
Yeah, I think that's the problem, Paul.
Yeah, all right. Quick break. Back with more. You can tell me what I've got to do during the break. More in a sec here on Paul Murray Live. I still don't understand how the website works, but I appreciate the tutorial. Thank you. Matt Canavan, of course, freely available to help at any time with any problems you have. Nicholas Reese, the same. Of course, no parking tickets if you mention Sky News. That's part of the plan down there at the Town Hall, and that's nice to see. All right. Now, speaking of couple of councils have turned around and they've made it very clear, particularly Central Sydney, who would like fewer cars on the road at all in the local government area. Some local councils who want to be able to turn it down to, say, even 30 k's an hour. Nick, I've got to ask you here, because I understand we want to get more pedestrians in. I understand that we want people not to die, but of course that's because they've got headphones in, not because the cars are going particularly fast. But also you need stuff delivered, because last time I checked, nothing grows in the shops on Burke Street. It actually needs to be delivered, and that shouldn't just be at 3 a.m. So how do you balance it?
Well, it's a complex engineering question, isn't it? I mean, look, 75% of the trips across Greater Sydney or Greater Melbourne, Brisbane's probably even higher, are done in cars. And so given such dominance of the modes of transport, you need to ensure that people can get into the central city and around the central city fairly easily using motor vehicles. Having said that, you can't have 5.5 million people, 5-odd million people all trying to go into the central city at once in the cars. It just won't work. There's just not enough road space there for them. And equally, at the end of the day, you're trying to optimise the use of the limited road space in the city for pedestrians, motorists, cyclists and others, and so you try to devise, you try and carve it up in such a way that you're trying to optimise the amount of space so the most number of people can move efficiently around as quickly and easily as possible. So it always means that there's trade-offs between different modes, and one group or another ends up getting cranky. Generally around the world, it's going the same direction that Sydney is. They're trying to widen the footpaths, and that's because you can just move far more people around your city through pedestrian, walking, rather than through other means. But you've still got to make it easy for people to get into the city as well.
Well, it's also important in the case of the city of Sydney, and again, we're a national show, but still, if they want to get more people to walk around the city, feel free to wash it down. It smells like a toilet. They don't use water as much as they should because, environment. But again, I mean, for a bloke living in a regional area, this stuff seems a little bit confusing. I have no doubt, Matt, in terms of the priorities. But places like New York have got millions of people. Not everyone has a car, but most of the streets, okay, the result is a traffic jam where it doesn't matter if the speed sign says 30. You're only going to be going 20 or 15 every few minutes.
Yeah, it's pretty much naturally regulated, if you like, because too much traffic, fewer people will go in, of course, or choose other modes. But look, I mean, as you say, it's all a bit confusing to me. I'm all for, let's just make the Greens get in charge of all of these cities so they make them completely hellholes and unlivable, and everyone will want to move to the bush. I'm all for that. I'm fine with it. Let's do that. Because they vote for the Greens. They should have Greens policies imposed on them. Carbon taxes, high income tax, no negative gearing, take that off them, everything. The whole the ballybaloo. And then if you don't want to live under a Green autocracy, come and move to the bush. That would be a good plan for our country, diversify our population.
Correct, but there are great independent choices as well, like Nicholas Reece on the ballot, no doubt, at the local government elections at some point in time as the Deputy Lord Mayor of Melbourne. See, he starts off insulting me.
That's not going to help him.
Endorsing
That's not going to help him, Paul.
Yeah, I know.
You really are getting to him tonight. You're going to endorse him.
And of course, the problem with Matt's theory about putting the Greens in charge of our capital cities is that 70+% of the Australian economy is generated out of those capital cities, and so that wouldn't be good for anyone, including people in the bush.
We'd really struggle without you. Without the bankers and the lawyers, we'd be lost. We'd be totally lost.
I think we'll take a coal mine over a cafe.
It might pain you, Matt. It might pain you, but that is the truth.
All right.
I don't think so.
All right. Thank you, lads. That was fun.
Set that experiment up.
Let's do it again. Thank you. Look forward to it. All right. Quick break. Back with more. Apparently, there's a new James Bond on the way. Who may it be? I'll tell you next. Late debate in a second, but before that, there is about to be a new James Bond. Why? Because, no spoiler, but it didn't end amazingly well for Daniel Craig in Die Another Day. Was that the last one? Or Die Another Death of Day Another? Whatever, you get the point. I loved him. I thought he was a great James Bond. Who's going to be the next James Bond, though? GQ magazine has put up a whole bunch of selections. Obviously, also all of these are potential lifelong partners for Liz Storer. We'll get to that in a moment or two's time. But apparently, the people's favourite, a vote of people suggested Idris Elba will be the fan favourite to be the next James Bond. And as I say, Liz will personally audition every one of them. More in a second.